Hello everyone, it's Andre. Before we get into the video, I just wanted to kind of mention a couple things. So first off, this video I wanted to do for a very long time, but due to the extensive research and information on this, I really didn't want to do it, mainly because, I still work a full-time job, so trying to find the time to do this much work for a video is really discouraging, I guess. I just didn't want to do it, frankly, because I have so much to do outside of YouTube. I'm going to be covering everything, for the most part, that happened at Unit 731. So if you are sensitive to like these topics right here, I still don't know how to do this. Right here, these topics right here. If you're sensitive to these, viewer discretion is highly advised. There's going to be a lot of things that are hard to talk about, hard to listen to, so if you're a little squirmish with that, don't watch, I guess, or just know that it's in the video. Second thing I wanted to talk about is 81% of my viewers are not subscribed, and I think that's kind of weird. That's such an interesting interesting stat to look at. But yeah, if you want to subscribe to the channel, if you want to support the channel, definitely hit that subscribe button. It would help me out immensely. I would really appreciate it. Outside of YouTube, obviously I have a full-time job, so it's a little bit hard to get videos out, but I am taking it more seriously. I want to build a community with this, as well as grow the channel in general. So if you want to support the channel, I would appreciate it. A subscription is free. It is super easy. Just click that button right here somewhere. Yeah, 81% of you subscribe. All 81%. I want all of you to subscribe. Thanks for being here, and I hope you enjoy the video. I'll see you at the end. Unit 731, formerly known as the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of Kwantung Army, began its research in 1936, but other sources state it initially started operations in 1932 by a group of 5 scientists. Unit 31 was located in the Pingfeng Manchukuo, which today is now northeast China. It was occupied by Japan, and operations began. This facility was a covert biological and chemical warfare research and development unit that engaged mostly in illegal human experimentation and biological weapon testing. It was responsible for some of the most notorious war crimes committed by the Japanese Army ever recorded. Human test subjects were known as logs and were completely dehumanized during their stay in the facility. Unit 731 was taken over and commanded until the end of the war by General Shiro Ishii, who was a combat medic in the Kwantung Army. The facility itself was officially built in 1935 as a replacement for the Zhangma fortress, and Ishii and his people used it to expand their capabilities. After the invasion of Manchuria, Japan decided to build the facility due to it allowing easier access to the Chinese people for them to conduct their experiments, as well as separating it from their home island. Unit Togo first started in Zhangma Fortress, which was a prison and experimentation camp in this area. The types of prisoners there were anything from common criminals, bandits, anti-Japanese partisans, as well as political prisoners. The prisoners held up here were generally well kept and fed, and were given rice or wheat, meat, fish, and even alcohol sometimes. Over several days, however, prisoners were eventually drained of their blood and deprived of nutrients and water, vivisected, and or infected with plague bacteria and other microbes. Their deteriorating health was documented. Due to a prison break in 1934, the fortress's secrecy was jeopardized, and an explosion in 1935 led Ishii to shut the fortress down. The explosion in the facility is believed to have been sabotage by someone within the unit. After receiving authorization to relocate to Pingfang, he began the experiments in a much larger, disturbing facility. In 1936, Emperor Hirohito issued a decree which authorized the expansion of the unit and integration into the Kwangtung Army. It was then divided into two units, the Ishii unit and the Wakamatsu unit. From here on, we will be discussing the types of things that took place at this facility. This is your warning. Maruta, Halsklots, logs. These were the code words given to the thousands of humans involved in experiments in Unit 731. Both meaning log in Japanese and German. As a joke, the workers would often ask, "How many logs fell?" due to the cover-up story given to authorities stating that the facility was nothing more than a lumber mill. Researchers in Unit 731 published some journals from those who kept note of the experiments there, and to further cover up any signs of human testing, these journals were written as if the research had been conducted on long-tailed monkeys or Manchurian monkeys. According to the American historian Sheldon H. Harris, the Togo unit employed gruesome tactics to secure specimens of select body organs. If Ishii or one of his co-workers wished to do research on the human brain, then they would order the guards to find them a useful sample. A prisoner would be taken from his cell. Guards would hold him while another guard would smash the victim's head open with an axe. His brain would be extracted off to the pathologist, and then to the crematorium for the usual disposal. Another quote from former Osaka University Professor Emeritus Nakagawa Yonezo, studied at Kyoto University during the war. While he was there, he had watched footage of the human experiments and executions at the facility. He later testified regarding the seemingly fun the experimenters would have.
実験の中には細菌戦力の向上や医学の発展とは全く関係ないものがありました。専門家の好奇心でこんなことをしたらどうなるのかということです。残暑を実行し研究したことにどのような医学的な目的があったでしょうか。全くありません。それはただの遊びでした。専門家も遊びたがるものです。
When it comes to experiments, the Japanese army did not hold back. Prisoners were told that they would receive some sort of vaccine for a random illness. What most didn't know was that they were actually being injected with venereal diseases, STIs, or more commonly known as STDs. Their injections of choice were syphilis and gonorrhea. Prisoners were often victims of rape by the facility's guards as well. Surgery conducted for experimental purposes on a living organism, typically animals with a central nervous system, to view living internal structure. Vivisection was another procedure that was very common within the walls of Unit 731, but instead of animals, they were performed on living humans, and more often than not, without any form of anesthesia. There was no age or gender discrimination when it came to these experiments. Men, women, children, infants, all fell subject to these tests. Former Unit 731 member Okawa Fukamatsu admitted to having vivisected a pregnant woman. After injecting one of their logs with the disease, the vivisection would begin, so they could study the effects of the disease they chose. Prisoners would sometimes have their limbs removed as a way to study blood loss, but sometimes these limbs would be removed and reattached to the opposite side of the body of the victim, seemingly out of sheer curiosity. Stomachs were surgically removed, and victims would also have their esophagus reattached to their intestines. Other prisoners would have organs such as the brain, lungs, and liver removed. A former member of Unit 731, interviewed by the New York Times, gave an account of his first dissection on a living human being. This experiment involved infecting the subject with the plague for the purpose of developing plague bombs for the war. The fellow knew that it was over for him, and so he didn't struggle when they led him into the room and tied him down. But when I picked up the scalpel, that's when he began screaming. I cut him open from the chest to the stomach, and he screamed terribly, and his face was all twisted in agony. He made this unimaginable sound. He was screaming so horribly, but then he finally stopped. This was all in a day's work for the surgeons, but it really left an impression on me because it was my first time. Aside from performing some of the most unimaginable things to people within the facility, the Japanese staff of Unit 731, 1644, and 100 were also experimenting with the deployment of epidemic-based biowarfare weapons to use against the Chinese populace. And this was not limited to only military personnel. Civilians were also a huge target for these attacks, as the things performed are very difficult to maintain to one specific group of people. Plague-infected fleas were being bred in the labs of 731 and 1644, which were spread by low-flying aircraft over Chinese cities in 1940 and 1941. These operations killed thousands with bubonic plague epidemics. Nanjing was also a target for these attacks. An expedition there involved spreading typhoid and paratyphoid germs through the wells, marshes, and houses within the city, as well as infusing the germs into snacks, which would then be distributed amongst the locals. After this expedition, it was concluded that the paratyphoid was more effective, which made the experimenters very happy. At least 12 large-scale bioweapon field trials were carried out, and at least 11 Chinese cities were attacked with these biological weapons. Japanese researchers performed countless tests on prisoners with the plague, cholera, smallpox, botulism, and others. This then led to the development of the deformation bacilli bomb, which contained anthrax, and, as well as the flea bomb, spreading the plague. Researchers would wear protective suits and examine the bodies of the dying victims after the bombs were dropped. Planes would also drop supply boxes full of infected food, clothing, and other supplies in Chinese areas not yet occupied by Japan. It is estimated that these biological attacks took the lives of at least 400,000 Chinese civilians. Franklin D. Roosevelt condemned the attacks in 1943, and Chiang Kai-shek sent a delegation of Army and foreign medical personnel in November 1941 to document evidence and treat the afflicted. During the final months of World War II, Japan was planning for an attack on San Diego, California. Codenamed Cherry Blossoms at Night, this was a proposal to infect the American West Coast with the bubonic plague, delivered by kamikaze pilots, and was supposed to take place on September 22, 1945. Due to the strong opposition of General Yoshijiro Umezu, the plan was scrapped, and Japan surrendered just 5 weeks before the plan had been finalized. If the other experiments weren't inhumane enough, then this next section will surely prove how evil the staff at these facilities truly were. Prisoners at these facilities would be tested on their immunity to certain situations. Some were deprived of food and water to see how long it would take for them to succumb to malnutrition and to see how long someone can survive until completely dehydrated. Others were placed in low-pressure chambers until their eyes escaped their sockets. Other experiments included hanging subjects upside down until death, crushing them with heavy objects, electrocution, being dehydrated with hot fans, placing prisoners into centrifuges and spun until death, injected with animal blood, most notably horse blood, exposing humans to extremely high doses of X-rays, subjected to various chemical weapons inside gas chambers, injected with seawater, being buried or burned alive, and much more possibly not documented. Aside from these tests, prisoners were also injected with different toxins as well. Pufferfish or fugu venom, heroin, Korean bindweed, Bactyl, and castor oil seeds were forcefully injected into their human subjects. Blood drainage is something that was also performed to study the effects of blood loss, and according to former Unit 731 vivisectionist Okawa Fukamatsu, in one case, at least half a liter of blood was drawn at 2 to 3 day intervals. It is said that many men, women, and children had been mummified during these dehydration experiments, and during the hot fan tests, prisoners would sweat themselves to death and weigh 1/5 the normal body weight. Unit 731 had a dedicated building which functioned for the sole purpose of gas experiments. Gases such as mustard gas, lewisite, cyanic acid gas, white phosphorus, Adamsite, and phosgene gas were used on these people. Takeo Wano, a former medical worker in Unit 731, recalls a time he saw a Western man cut vertically into 2 pieces and pickled in a jar of formaldehyde. Some tests have been described as psychopathically sadistic, with no conceivable military application. A testament to this quote is when one experiment documented the time it took for a 3-day-old baby to freeze to death. Army engineer Hisato Yoshimura was described as a scientific devil and cold-blooded animal by members of Unit 731. Yoshimura would take captives outside and would dip their appendages in various water temperatures, wait for them to freeze, and strike their limbs with a short stick. Various treatments were then conducted to see which would be the most effective for frostbite. In one experiment, former member Naoji Uezono recalls 2 naked men put in an area that was 40 to 50 degrees below zero, and researchers filmed the whole process until the men passed away. The men suffered so much agony, they were digging their nails into each other's flesh. This topic is a tough one for me personally, so I don't blame you if you click off the video if you haven't already. As rape was a common occurrence in the facility, they took this as a way to also experiment with the act. Researchers in charge of these tests wore laboratory clothing, completely covering themselves aside from their eyes and mouth. They came up with a plan to spread syphilis that did not involve injection. They would have a man and woman enter a cell together, one with syphilis, and were made to have sex with each other to spread the disease. It was also made very clear that if one or both declined, they would be shot. After infection, they were vivisected to monitor the different stages of infection as it progressed throughout the body. Guards would call the genitalia of female prisoners injected with syphilis jam-filled buns. Due to the forced pregnancy and rape of female prisoners, many children also infected with syphilis were born and grew up within the walls of Unit 731. Forced pregnancy was apparently used to test the transmission from mother to child for diseases, again, particularly syphilis. Despite children being born in the facility, there has been no accounts of any survivors of Unit 731, children included. It is suspected that the children of female prisoners were either killed after birth or aborted. This testimony by a former unit member graphically outlines the harsh reality of the conditions and sex crimes committed. One of the former researchers I located told me that one day he had a human experiment scheduled, but there was still time to kill. So he and another unit member took the keys to the cells and opened one that housed the Chinese woman. One of the unit members raped her. The other member took the keys and opened another cell. There was a Chinese woman in there who had been used in a frostbite experiment. She had several fingers missing and her bones were black, with gangrene set in. He was about to rape her anyway. Then he saw that her sex organ was festering, with pus oozing to the surface. He gave up the idea, left and locked the door, then later went on to his experimental work. As the war was coming to an end, the Red Army was approaching in August 1945. When news reached the facilities, they had abandoned their work immediately and the ministries of Tokyo ordered the destruction of all incriminating materials. Any witnesses, notably 300 prisoners, were either gassed or fed poison, and 600 Chinese and Manchurian laborers were shot. Ishii ordered every member of the group to disappear and to take the secret to the grave. Potassium cyanide vials were issued to every member in case they were captured and tortured for any information regarding the experiments at the compounds. Ishii's Japanese troops blew up the compounds in the final days of the war to destroy evidence, although many still remained somewhat intact. Murray Sanders arrived in Yokohama in September 1945. As a renowned microbiologist, it was his job to investigate Japanese biological warfare activity. Sanders had no idea Unit 731 was in operation until the Japanese shared little information after he had threatened to involve the Soviets. He then took this information to General Douglas MacArthur, who was the supreme commander of the Allied powers and was responsible for rebuilding Japan during Allied occupation. MacArthur struck a deal with the Japanese people. Provide all information regarding their research at Unit 731, and in return, they would be granted immunity. Americans believed the information gathered from the research was very valuable, and did not want other enemy nations to acquire the data from the facility. So, members of Unit 731 were able to walk free, and one graduate of Unit 1644 named Masami Kitaoka continued to perform experiments on unwilling Japanese subjects from 1945 to 1956. He performed these tests while working for Japan's National Institute of Health Services, and would also infect mentally ill patients with typhus. In the late 1990s, Japan had finally acknowledged the existence of the unit, but refused to mention what took place there, and in 2018, Japan disclosed the names of 3,607 members who worked at Unit 731. To this day, Japan still feels shame for what took place in World War II, and there has been many attempts to remove mentions of Unit 731 in school textbooks. As there are mentions, going into detail about the activities there are still far and few between. In Saburo Ienaga's New History of Japan, he goes into detail of what happened there, with officers' testimonies. The Ministry of Education attempted to remove this passage, as they saw it as insufficient. The Supreme Court of Japan ruled in 1997 that the testimonies were indeed sufficient, and requiring the removal of the passage was a violation of freedom of speech. In Harbin, China, lays the Unit 731 Museum as a reminder of the atrocities the Japanese Army performed while occupying Manchuria and the surrounding areas. Well, you made it through possibly one of the worst video topics I'll probably cover on this channel. I mentioned before, the reason I started this series covering topics regarding Japan is to provide more information regarding Japan as a country. While many of us appreciate the things Japan gives us, it is by no means a perfect country, like many people think, and has a dark past just like every other nation. I will not tolerate any racism towards Japanese people, or any other nationality or race for that matter. World War II was a very problematic war for many reasons, and should be learned from, rather than be used to unearth or awaken any hatred towards a specific group of people. Many people either know about this topic, or have heard about it in passing. I want to educate those who are interested in learning more about this topic, or haven't heard about it at all, and provide examples of things that shouldn't be repeated on a small or larger scale. No amount of hatred or scale of war should involve the actions mentioned in this video and similar videos discussing other intense topics. Going into all the experiments and displaying the testimonies allows you, the viewer, to fully grasp the absurdity that took place at Unit 731 and the other facilities. As difficult as these topics can be to speak about as a creator and to listen to as a viewer, I believe it's important to outline them and be unfiltered so we can fully understand and have these things leave a lasting impression on us. That way, we can understand the importance of caring for one another and imagine the pain and trauma thousands of people had to endure. So hopefully, if something like this happens again, I really hope not, there's enough people who will fight against it and stop it. Thank you so much for watching, listening, subscribing, commenting, and being you. I appreciate every single one of you so much, and thank you for allowing me to do this and being patient with me during this growing process. I hope you learned something new from watching my videos, and know that you matter, you're loved, and I'll see you in the next one.